Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome. My name is Will, and today, along with my colleagues Isaac and Connor, we're going to walk you through today's exercise. We have two main goals for today's session. The first is that you leave with a sense of how analysts are using Seerist to build their risk assessments. We recognize that not all aspects that go into a risk assessment can be pulled from Seerist, but we hope you leave with an understanding of what the platform can do to both simplify and improve your assessments. Secondly, we know from questions that were submitted prior to the webinar, this is a real focus for people. We hope you leave with a sense of some of the risks and threats that Seerist is observing and recording today around the Olympic Games. We'll move relatively quickly through headlines, quickly sharing just high-level bullet points during today's demonstration. But that said, you'll also be getting a PDF after today's call with more detailed information. And if you want more than that, we'll leave with or we'll end with our contact details. You can reach out to Connor, Isaac, myself, get in touch for a one-on-one call. Really quickly, for some housekeeping, if you find the screen during the demo too small or you want to make adjustments to your view, you just look in the top right of the WebEx screen. You'll see a button that says Layout. You can adjust that there. And then lastly, on the housekeeping, as we go through today's presentation, please use the chat box in the bottom right. We'll monitor that and use it to organize our Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions as we go throughout, feel free to lob those in there and we'll make sure to address them at the end. Isaac, you can just pop over to the next slide. Cool. So we're in the intro. We'll cover that for about five minutes, just another minute or two more here. But for the bulk of today, we're going to be in the live Seerist environment. We'll show you control risks analysis pieces and future events that will allow you to discover some of the risks and threats around the Olympics. Isaac will take us through those. And then we'll look at our AI models called Events AI for monitoring and getting current updated information. And lastly, we'll take a look at content folders. Those are an analyst tool that allows you to organize and save time. We promise to save about 5 minutes at the end for Q&A. We'll cover some of the pre-submitted questions, but if we don't get to yours, feel free to reach out to us after. Rounding out the intro, for those not as familiar with Seerist, you might have seen some of our marketing materials. You might have chatted with someone in the past. We're an augmented analytics company helping security and intelligence professionals protect their people, their physical assets, and their mission. As you'll see today, if you haven't seen the Seerist platform already, we do that through a mix of tech, so that's machine learning models applied to open source data, as well as analyst or human written reports. Isaac and Connor have been working with a lot of our clients that are focused on tracking and monitoring threats and risks around the Olympic Games as part of their role on the technical solutions team. And together, we're going to walk through some of those data feeds. I mentioned earlier, Isaac's going to cover the human risks. Connor is going to walk through how some of our tech supports monitoring those, and we'll close with some workflows. With that said, Isaac, over to you, and I'll share my screen.
Will, thank you very much for the introduction, and a massive thank you to everyone for joining us. I know it's quite early in the morning for some of you guys, or a bit late at night as well, so I really appreciate everyone's time here. And without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm just going to stop sharing to let Will bring up the environment, the Seerist environment,
Can you see my
and we'll
screen?
get into it. I'm all good. Yep, I can see the screen now.
Awesome.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Will. So yeah, as Will mentioned, the first part of Seerist that we're going to look into today, when we're looking into carrying out our risk assessment before the Paris Olympics, is that human analysis written by our strategic partners at Control Risks. So a good way of finding this analysis is first of all by jumping into the search function under analytics in Seerist. So I'm just going to jump into search now. I'm going to pick a date range that suits us. So in this case, I think probably wise to go back to the start of June, I think, just to capture all that analysis in the run-up to the games. As we get closer and closer, we pick analysis, and we toggle all the analysis filters on to make sure we're capturing all the analysis we want. And suffices to use just two keywords in the keyword section, and that would be very simply in this case Olympic and Olympics to capture all that information and analysis that controllers have written pertaining to the Olympics. So as Will enters these two words here, we'll see that that results bar on the right starts to populate very quickly with all the analysis published by Control Risk's Global Risk Analysis team on the Olympic Games. Now, off the back of this search we've done in the analysis, I'm going to go through 5 key risks associated that we've been able to identify associated with the Olympics and the lead up to the Games. And in order to go through this, we're just going to jump into a content folder. Actually, we've previously created to assort these articles and analysis pieces. More on that later from Will. But I'm just going to go through a few of these risks. I'll read a little couple of excerpts out from these analysis pieces to give you a flavour of the sort of risks we could be looking at in the upcoming games and what that might prompt us to do as a security professional. So, first thing we're going to look at here is the global terrorism outlook. So, in this article, we see that transnational Islamist extremist groups will likely retain high intent to inspire and direct attacks against international sporting events, especially the Summer Olympics and Paralympic Games, July to September. So we've already got one key major risk there, which is the terrorism risk throughout the games, which could push us as security professional to set up monitoring for violent incidents and potentially organize a system whereby we need to be able to contact our crisis management team and brief them on the threat of maybe violent attacks or terrorist attacks before the games. So we can add that to our list already, terrorism risk. Secondly, we're going to look at Russian-linked acts of sabotage as another important risk we've identified in the run-up to the games. Just a quick excerpt from this piece that French authorities in June have arrested multiple individuals suspected of carrying out separate acts of sabotage and disinformation linked to pro-Russian actors. So these developments demonstrate the intent of pro-Russian actors to cause disruption in France and will contribute to a heightened security threat in the country in the coming months. So again, this is another risk that tells us that potential disruptive activities on the way during the Olympics. And as an analyst, it shows us to look out for those markers which could trigger these events. So potential unrest and misinformation, which could be driving this unrest. So it looks like the Russians, as we've seen in that article as well, are looking to embarrass France and hopefully make a sort of show out of these instances of sabotage and unrest, hopefully. So it's another one we want to monitor closely. Any unrest linked to Russian sabotage or misinformation, which brings me along to my next our next point, our next risk we identified, which is the risk of far-right violence. Now, I'm sure many of us have been following the French elections very closely over the past couple of weeks, and we've noticed there's been a surge in popularity in the far-right groups in France. So just a quick excerpt here. The far-right National Rally, including its allies, came third with 143 seats, marking its highest ever score. This is likely to embolden far-right militant violence in the coming months. So again, another really helpful, actionable piece of analysis for us to add to our monitoring for the games. So not only are we looking for potential misinformation in data we're analyzing, also looking for far-right discourse in the open source and any potential calls to action for affiliated groups. And this again ties in quite nicely with the unrest that Russian sabotage is looking to incite as well. Moving on to a very different sort of pair of risks now is environmental activism. We just take a look into this article, you can see that in France, environmentalist group Soulèvement de la Terre plans a large-scale mobilization throughout the month of July ahead of the Paris Olympic Games later that month, which again shows us that the kind of potential bouts of unrest, maybe road blockages, maybe disruption in central Paris, stopping our employees or executives getting through to key events from hotels to venues, for example. So again, one for us to think about in the context of transportation and maybe planning alternate travel routes in Paris during the games to be able to react that quickly. In a similar fashion, planned strike action during the games is another risk we foresee. Just looking ahead towards Paris 2024, just a little excerpt here. The National Federation of Mines and Energy Union on the 7th of June announced that it had issued a notice of possible strike action from the 14th of June to the 13th of September, which marks the latest declaration of possible strike action by a union affiliated to the Union Confederation, the General Confederation of Labour, otherwise known as the CGT in France, during the upcoming Olympic Games. This will again inform potential disruption around transport, particularly as we'll see later, potential strike action at airports, key travel hubs in key sectors, which really could push us to think about alternate travel routes for our employees and executives who will be attending the games. So we've now got a really good grasp of some of the key risks we want to look out for at the games, and good analytical background in these risks. Maybe it's a good idea now to start looking ahead towards the games. And a really good way of doing this within the Seerist platform is accessing the future events calendar, which can be found under country analysis within the Seerist platform in the analytics section. So by clicking on country analysis, and in this case, typing in France, we will be taken to the country analysis page in France, which brings together not only all the verified incident and analysis pertaining to France, but also in the bottom right-hand corner, we can see a roller with all the future events planned for France. Now, so future events are incidents, planned incidents added to Seerist by the human intelligence team at Seerist. So these are planned or recurring incidents, for example, such as national holidays or major sporting events that may cause operational disruption. It also includes much shorter one-off security events, such as planned protests, strikes, and marches, which are added at a much shorter notice. So, for example, the human intelligence team at Seerist is actively monitoring for mentions of upcoming strike or protest activity and adding them into the platform as and when they see these things planned. So we can have that forward-looking view. So if we actually click on the view calendar option here, we can see this populate in our Seerist platform as a calendar, much like we might be viewing our own work agenda. We have all the potentially disruptive events for France listed here. So we've got the bigger banners covering our major sporting events, obviously the Olympics, the Tour de France, but we have a couple of shorter banners which have been added in response to planned activity. So we just look on the 17th of July, actually, which was recently announced and added to the platform. We have planned airport worker strikes here. So we click on this banner, we'll get a bit more information on the location, who's responsible for this strike, the nature of this strike, and the potential impacts of this strike. So again, tying into what we saw in the analysis pieces, we see there's a real heavy potential impact on the transportation of any personnel we'll have in Paris through the games. Now, this on the 17th may well coincide with many people arriving in Paris at Orly Airport, and that's definitely something to have in mind, whether that's getting from the airport to assigned venues and hotels, or even having to pick a different flight to get to Paris to avoid this potential disruption. I think it's important to notice, to mention, as with the human analysis written by our team at Controlris, a lot more content will continue to be added to this future events calendar as we approach the games and as more potentially disruptive events are detected by our intelligence team, which I think is a really important thing. So, to summarize, what we've discussed here is we've used the analysis of the series and the future events to map out 5 key risks that we're going to be looking out for at the Paris Olympics. So terrorism, Russian-linked acts of sabotage, far-right violence, environmental activism, and lastly, planned strike action during the games. So now we've really mapped out these potential risks for the Paris Olympic Games. We might want to start monitoring them a bit more closely on a tactical level in the open source. For this, I'm going to hand over to Connor.
Thank you, Isaac. And hi, everyone. Many thanks for joining today's session. Hope you're finding it interesting so far. Events AI is the functionality of Seerist in which you can access content from open source media, export into Seerist from the many thousands of news and social media sources that we connect to. To access Events AI in the left-hand panel, if we click Search, open this up and select Events. then we can access Events AI. So when monitoring the security threats associated with the Olympics, as Isaac's outlined so far, Events AI is where security and intelligence teams can track developments as they're occurring. We've seen what Control Risks expects in terms of the risks associated with the games. Events AI is where we can monitor this on the ground. So those strikes, those roadblocks, protests, terror attacks, or whatever else may be happening. It's here that we can set up alerts for relevant content so that analysts and response teams have maximum visibility on what's going on. And we can also start to build out these folders of relevant content to form the basis of your risk assessments and enhance cooperation in your teams. It's worth noting here that Seerist's collections team is responsible for curating the sources that we integrate into the platform. So we have extensive source coverage for every location globally, but when a massive event such as the Olympics, Paralympics, European Football Championships, or whatever it may be is taking place, we will add in large volumes of new and relevant sourcing. So maybe monitoring official statements from the International Olympic Committee. It could be including more local activist sources in Paris or other host cities. It could be setting up bespoke social media search strings referencing the Olympics and references to crime, protests, sabotage, whatever it may be. Now, if I were producing an assessment for, or just wanted to monitor the Olympic Games, I would be building unique queries for each of these different threat types that I want to monitor. And for this exercise, we have built several such queries, looking at the topics identified by control risk analysts and Seerist intelligence team. And now we'll walk you through how we've done this and what the information ultimately looks like. As a quick note, for a major event like the Olympics, there's a lot of chatter. We'll see reporting around lots of different topics. Some of these may be more relevant to a security or intelligence function, but there will also be reporting around topics that might be less relevant, such as who won gold at a certain event, or perhaps which celebrities have been spotted around the stadium. It's therefore really important that we're specific with what it is we want to monitor. And let's select an example search here. So if we'll click at the top, select a saved search, let's click on the Olympic strike action for one. In terms of the logic that we've applied here, it's somewhat similar to what we did for analysis. We've selected France as a location on the platform, and we've applied some keywords. We click back those keywords, we can see we're looking at references to Olympics or Olympic Games, simply with references to strike or strikes. And on the right-hand side, we can see the content coming through news and social media that meets these parameters. And at first glance, I can start to see some of those stories referencing the airport strikes within Paris, which of course may be very disruptive. And this is where that more tactical information can be relevant. It's how you can track situations in a more dynamic manner and start to include it in these content folders that we've mentioned a couple of times already. To hone in on these specific threat types, of course, we're applying these additional keyword filters, and this will look different for each of these searches that we're building. So if we were to select another search, for example, our political crisis search, rather than looking at references to strikes, we're looking at references to election. And we can see the content updating on the right-hand side. We can see lots of stories looking at French Union challenging Macron's governance post-election, for example. And if we select another search, for example, the terrorism monitor, this is a slightly larger query. We've looked at a few more keywords here, and we can see stories of, for example, once this is loaded, we can start to see stories such as ISIS-K suicide bombers being arrested for planning to attack the Olympic Games. Really, there's a lot of information here, and it's about what we can do with this information that's important. So when I see a relevant piece of content that I'd like to view later, or I'd like to include in my threat assessment, I can build out a content folder. I can click this button on the screen, and I can start adding this relevant content to a content folder. You may have separate folders for different types of threat. You may all have it in one place, but this is a really easy and efficient way to compile all of this information and be able to extract it later on, as will demonstrate shortly. But if I were to want to more dynamically monitor specific risks and threats over a longer period, it's here that I can save my parameters as a Seerist saved search, as we've done. It means every time I log in the platform, I don't need to manually enter keywords each time or select my location. It's just very easy to load these parameters up. And we can also create alerts. And this is really the final thing that I'll be talking about today. If you click create alerts at the top of the screen, you'll be notified in your inbox whenever a relevant story comes in. So you've got maximum visibility on any story that may pose a risk to your organization's operations. Just as a quick recap, we've shown how Events AI can be used to more dynamically monitor situations at the tactical level pertaining to some of those topics identified in the analysis. We've shown how we can start to build folders related to these topics and how we can build alerts so you can be notified by your email, for example, if a relevant story comes through. Now I'm going to hand over to Will to close our session here.
Excellent. Thanks, Connor. From a workflow perspective, this next topic is one that we've talked about throughout the call, but content folders are a feature that our Intel analyst clients get very excited about. It helps them do three main things. So I'm going to navigate to the top left-hand here, open up content, and the three main things it does is it helps them save time. Two is easily collaborate with colleagues when there are two analysts that are working on the same initiative or the same topic at the same time. And then lastly is to manage shift handoffs or any time off, whether planned or unplanned. And to make that real for you, looking at this use case, to save time in building a report leading up to the Olympic Games, you saw that we added relevant content as we went through the demo. And over the course of researching a report, whether it's over an afternoon or over multiple days, you can use this to build a repository of data that you can then annotate and then reference later when it's closer to report building time, or if the business requires you to share an updated report with new information. For the individual, annotation can be particularly helpful if we were looking at this quarterly Outlook terrorism report, and I wanted to remind myself to include the graphics in the report that I ultimately share with the business. I can share this folder with any of my colleagues, and that helps both with the collaboration and avoiding duplicating work on shift change or around time off. So I could share this either with Connor or Isaac. This is a custom demo account, so you won't see the colleagues populate here. And the benefit is that as pieces of content are added by me or by Isaac or Connor, all users would have visibility into that as well as the annotations being made. And then lastly, to make it very real for you, whether it's a 24/7 monitoring capability at our client or whether it's a strategic Intel analyst, eventually people need to sleep or people need to take paid time off. And these content folders are a way to avoid duplicating the work that's already been done leading up to building that report, to quarterly monitoring briefings, or sorry, quarterly briefings to management. These are an easy way, very simple, very basic, but since the primary audience today would be Intel analysts, we wanted to have a quick commercial for how you go from that to ultimately building a report using Seerist. Isaac, I think with that, we'll switch back to PowerPoint and review what we just discussed. So a mixture of things. We demonstrated how to discover some of the key threats around the Olympic Games in Paris, identified by control risks and by that future events calendar, those being things like the current political environment, the threat of terrorism, Russian-linked acts of sabotage, and then the threat of environmental protests and strike action. We showed you how you could monitor for those events in the coming days and during the games using machine learning models we call Events AI. And then lastly, we walked through what a potential workflow could be using those content folders, using those saved searches to go from discovering the information and ultimately building the infrastructure for what will become your risk assessment. That concludes the demo portion. We wanted to thank everyone for joining. I realize we sort of crushed the Q&A portion, but we have about 2 minutes to address questions that were pre-submitted, any that have been submitted in the chat so far. And again, from Connor, Isaac, myself, and the rest of the Seerist team, we really appreciate you joining today. So we'll open it up to Q&A. I haven't been monitoring the chat. Connor and Isaac, have you seen anything come through? I'll just start with one we received before today's presentation. And the question is, how do we predict demonstrations and compute the risk to our entities moving forward? And I think that applies both to the Olympic Games and it applies to events farther afield. Hopefully today you saw some of the recommendations we would make. One is to use that future events calendar to monitor for protests and strikes. Two is to use that events AI search. And the benefit there is that if the locations and the updates to features or aspects of those strikes or protests are being posted on the open web, you'll find near real-time updates to changes there so that you can do route planning. You can adjust maybe lodging for a VIP. And then lastly, one thing that we didn't cover today, but if you reach out to Connor, Isaac, or myself, we're happy to cover, is how you can build a verified events heat map. One thing lots of our clients will do is build a verified events heat map on a location to see where have protests most likely occurred in this city previously. We anticipate it'll be different for the Olympic Games since the sporting venues come into play, but that's one way you can view where are the hotspots where protests are most likely to occur. Is it around business centers? Is it around government buildings? And those three things are what we would recommend for you to be able to, one, compute the risk, and then monitor going forward. I can't see the chat. Can I ask Connor and Isaac for any assistance there? We got anything coming in that we need to address now that we're at time?
I can't see anything coming through at the moment.
Cool. Well, we are at time. Our contact information is on this last slide. I'll leave you with the reminder that you'll receive a follow-up with more details than we were able to cover looking at today's headlines. And you're more than welcome to reach out to Isaac, Connor, or myself after this call. I just wanted to say thank you again. Thanks, everybody.